Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Janine Shepard, and I am the Senior Manager of Philanthropy Events here at Food and Water Watch, and I will be your host for tonight's Livable Future Live and this monthly event series. I am excited to start this series with this year's book event. It is our Book of the Year event. At the end of every year, our executive director, Wenonah Hauter, takes a look back and chooses the book that stood out to her as the most memorable, the most thought-provoking, and the most timely book she read. And for 2024, that book was Barron's, Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry by Austin Frerick. We are honored to be joined by Austin Frerick today. And in a few minutes, Austin and Wenonah will be diving into a discussion of this book. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few Zoom reminders and announcements for upcoming events. Sorry. Okay, if you'd like to turn on closed captioning and add subtitles to your screen, click Show Captions in your Zoom toolbar. We will be recording this. We'll be adding instructions in the chat as well. Please use this chat throughout the evening to share your thoughts and reactions to what you're hearing. This chat is also where we'll share information and links with you, so keep an eye out for those. You'll also see a Q&A box. If you have questions you'd like to ask Austin, please put those in the Q&A box so we're sure to see them. We've set aside time at the end for your questions. And finally, I am recording this event and will share the recording with you in an email I'll send out tomorrow. As we start off the new year, I want to welcome anyone who might be new to Food and Water Watch. We are a national organization fighting for sustainable food, clean water, and a livable climate for all. And we believe that it's grassroots activism at all levels of government, local, state, and federal, that will create the change and solutions we need. Which is why it's always so inspiring to see so many people join us at events like these and hear from experts, get engaged in the issues we're up against, and take action alongside us. I think we all know that we have big challenges ahead of us under a Trump presidency, but Food and Water Watch has a history of winning, and we're prepared to defend the strides we've made. We will continue to take on factory farms, protect our water from toxic chemicals, fight for a future free of fossil fuels, and stand up against corporate climate scams. We've put together a list of our top priorities for the upcoming year, and we're putting that in the chat for you to check out. There are many ways for you to get involved with our work, whether that's making a donation, joining our volunteer network, or attending our events. And I'd like to invite you to our upcoming events in this monthly Livable Future Live series. On February 19th, we'll be discussing the Trump administration's cuts and rollbacks, what they mean for our food, water, and climate, and what we're doing about it. And in March, in honor of World Water Day, we'll be talking about the water and microplastic research, the human health risks, and what we need to do to protect our drinking water from these contaminants. And finally, I'd love to hear from you. We're putting a link in the chat to a short survey. Please let us know what you thought about this event and events you've joined in the past. And let us know what kind of programming you'd like to see in the future. We would love to hear from you, and your feedback will help shape our future programming. And if you fill out this survey, you'll be entered for a chance to win a copy of tonight's book, Barron's, Money, Power, and the Corruption in America's Food Industry. And with that, let's begin our discussion. As I've mentioned, tonight we're going to hear from Austin Frerick, the author of Barron's, Money, Power, and the Corruption in America's Food Industry. Every year, Food and Water Watch's executive director, Wenonah Hauter, chooses a book of the year, and Barron's is her 2024 selection. If you've read it, you can likely see why. This book grabs you with a personal story, weaves in the well-researched statistics, policy, and history, and brings us along for the ride with stories that are both personally and globally significant. The book outlines the tale of 7 barons of the food industry across the U.S., how they rose to power with the help of taxpayer dollars, exploited labor, and failed policies, and environmental devastation. He also reminds us that it doesn't have to be this way, that we can and need to take the power back and create a fair, healthy, and prosperous food industry. We are thrilled that Austin could join us this evening so that he and Wenonah can talk about this book and the current state of the food industry in the U.S. Please allow me to introduce Wenonah and Austin. Wenonah is the executive director of Food and Water Watch, which she founded 20 years ago in 2005 to channel the power of grassroots activism to fight for a future with clean, affordable water, sustainable food, and a livable climate. She has 3 decades of experience organizing and is the author of the books Fragility and Foodopoly. Austin Frerick, in addition to researching and writing this book, is an expert on agricultural and antitrust policy. He worked at the Open Markets Institute, the U.S. Department of Treasury, and the Congressional Research Service before becoming a fellow at Yale University. He's a 7th-generation Iowan and a 1st-generation college graduate with degrees from Grinnell College and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please join me in welcoming Wenonah and Austin. Wenonah, I will let you take it from here, and I'll see you all again towards the end when we get to those audience questions.
Thanks so much, Janine. Well, Austin, I think you know that I am a big fan of Barron's. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book is how you talked about growing up in Iowa and how you wove it throughout the book. Can you talk about why you wrote Barron's and how your personal experiences really shaped the narrative?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just thank you. Thank you all for being here. And you'll see if you look at my citations, Food and Water Watch is all over them. And I just want to say before we dive into this organization is built for moments like this. As we see regulatory capture run amok in this country, if it wasn't for this organization putting this information out there, we wouldn't know. But to your question, let me just start by saying I've lived the American dream. I've been very fortunate. I was born in the 90s in Iowa. My parents didn't go to college. My mom cut hair. My dad drove a truck. They built a home. And I had a really good childhood and upbringing, but I saw the slow decay of my home. Iowa should be the Tuscany of North America, but instead it's become the canary in the coal mine. Second highest cancer right now in America. It's in a water crisis. It's an obesity crisis. So intellectually, this book for me started with, how did this happen? How did it go off the rails? Because I really do believe you have to understand how power is amassed and understand how you got to a moment in order to fix it. But also just going back to the emotional stuff, it was grappling with why I saw this anger in Iowa. Why were people, really good people, just really mad at the system? And even telling this story, this book took me 5 years. And what I realized writing it is I have 7 robber barons, but these are just narrative devices to tell these bigger structural stories.
Well, I really liked how you started off with the hog barons in Iowa. I remember Iowa before the hog barons. I think I first went there for work in the 1980s. And you describe how the physical landmark and the political landmark have both significantly changed. Can you talk about what you see the link between these two changes?
Yeah, it's so funny. There's a stretch of road that in my head really shows this. It's called Highway 151. It runs from Cedar Rapids through Dubuque up to Madison. And growing up in Iowa, you go to the Dells. That's like your vacation in the summer. And so we did that all the time because it's the water park capital of America. And you'd see animals, beautiful rolling hills. Here's the thing though. I drive it now because I ended up going to grad school there. You smell them, but you don't see them. And on top of it, what used to be a 2-lane road is now a 4-lane road. And there's no reason why it should be 4 lanes. It was built but you realize it's built for the commodities, not for the people, to move the commodities as fast as they can outside the state. And all these towns, these beautiful driftless towns, are just slowly decaying. And so the connection between the two, the physical landscape, I kind of almost think of Iowa as like the New Jersey Turnpike. It's like the most industrial, dead, where it should be Tuscany, but it's not. And we shouldn't be shocked that anger is filling that void.
Yeah. So go
I was going to
ahead.
add on. No, sorry. I just, this one little point of never forget the land's producing the most it's ever produced, and none of that wealth is staying there. It's an extraction colony. Like, I'm very careful with that phrase because it's a very, it's aggressive rhetoric, but I really do view Iowa in some ways as almost like a 19th century Appalachia coal mining state of how it's run like a feudal lord of fiefdom.
Yeah, that's very true. So most people would be really surprised to hear that a conglomerate that's headquartered in Luxembourg and controlled by reclusive German sells more coffee than Starbucks today. So JAB Holding Company owns a huge list of coffee companies across the country. I mean, it's shocking, really. Pete's Coffee, Caribou, Krispy Kreme, Panera Bread, New York Bagels, and the list goes on and on. Can you talk a little bit about how they built this empire?
Yeah, that chapter is my antitrust chapter, which, fun fact, the first anti-monopoly laws in the world come from Iowa farmers. They were mad about the railroad, so they did something about it. So what happened is, when we tend to tell this history, we focus on Teddy Roosevelt and the meat packers, but really we truncate it. Like, this was Iowa farmers doing something, a few states copying it, then the federal government doing something, and then it took a few presidents to finally do something. And I make that point because this doesn't happen overnight. So we come up with this anti-monopoly framework in America that really, to me, allows for the prosperity of the 20th century, especially for workers. You know, you really see it in slaughtering. People like my grandfather, he worked at the Wilsons in Cedar Rapids. No job is inherently a middle-class job. Those are choices we make as a society to elevate those professions, empower that labor. And then what I focus on is in 1980s, you guys might know Robert Bork, President Reagan's famous Supreme Court nominee, failed. But what he did intellectually was he basically disassembled that anti-monopoly framework we had in America. And basically, it's pro-monopoly, to be blunt, but I think a hallmark of this era is so much language. It's designed to keep people out and hide what people are doing. And so he came up with this phrase called the Consumer Welfare Standard, where if you can hire an economist to show that prices go down in a merger, you can allow a merger to go through. Well, you can hire any economist to do that. What's really exciting to me, I actually find the most hopeful, is I really do think President Biden's appointment of Lena Khan to the Federal Trade Commission these last 4 years was one of the best things, because Lena she is a living historical figure. And that is, it's so weird to say that for like a 35-year-old, but this woman wrote an academic article, how Amazon's a monopoly, and we should go back that old framework of monopoly in America, just how junkified this Robert Bork framework is. And it went viral, and President Biden appointed her a position of power. And she's the one that stopped the Kroger's and Alba merger. She's the one that filed all these antitrust lawsuits against big tech. And by the way, she was very popular in a bipartisan way. I mean, whatever you think of Matt Gaetz, he praised her in the Wall Street Journal. And so that's what this chapter is, kind of telling people that history. And I also really wanted to make this point, that the chapter, because I think it's lost to history, that monopolists finance fascist. After World War II, Congress commissioned a report, how did it happen? And that was one of their key findings. Hitler's largest donor was a company called IG Farben. There's a great book called Hell's Cartel in this story. So they cut him a check, and the Congress report said that check made the dreams of my come true. So actually what we did, the American military, is we broke up the cartels. IG Farben was broken up into like 5 or 7 companies. You might have heard of one of them today. It's called Bayer Monsanto.
Now, can you talk a little bit about the coffee baron, JAB, and what they control?
So what's wild about this baron, this is my favorite slide to show people. because especially for college kids, because like everyone knows these coffee brands, Panera, Keurig, all that kind of stuff. And you think this illusion of choice. It's like every coffee store you see around the mall is really one secret German family. And what this family did is they didn't sell being a coffee in America until 2012. And historically, rich families, what they did is they just bought, property, stock market investments. Instead, what this family did is they engaged in monopoly plays. They saw a competitive coffee market, 20 different brands, threw their money at it, rolled it up to then, consolidate this space. And here's the thing, this really hurts the coffee farmers the most, because what used to be 20 buyers of coffee now is one. And also on top of it, innovation goes down. These companies are not what they used to be. And it's just sad. I mean, and then this family has a really dark history to the Nazis that I kind of weave in and tell. And just before I went to press, the Wall Street, so this British tabloids exposed their Nazi past. The family promised to do something better. They make a donation. And the Wall Street Journal reported that they're still selling coffee in Russia. And I really do think Putin is the closest thing we have to a modern day fascist. So that tells me their words mean absolutely nothing.
So, as you show in Barron's, the food industry is extremely consolidated. Can you talk a little bit from your point of view why it's so dangerous for our food system to be monopolized?
Yeah. Because it makes it very fragile. To me, the best example of it, we saw it with the baby formula crisis. You have one plant goes down, and this becomes such a national thing. And like even just pulling back from the food system, what I learned is the beauty of a family farm, it's almost like a diversified retirement portfolio. You have 6 crops going, if one craters, you're still fine. What happens now is this food system, and notably the Farm Bill, pushes farmers to do 1 or 2, 3 crops, which makes them very fragile. And so that's why, first of all, that's why it's super expensive, because, you have a bird flu disease that wipes out the chicken industry. So then you have to do all these disaster payments. And there's also a lot of national sovereignty issues that go on here where, unbeknownst to most people, 40% of your vegetables and 60% of your produce is now coming out from outside these boundaries.
So you tell a really succinct and entertaining story about Driscoll's berries. We've all seen Driscoll's berries. We've all eaten Driscoll's berries. And they control 1/3 of berries sold in grocery stores, but they don't grow any berries themselves. And you use the word chickenizing when describing this phenomena. How has this system for selling berries come to pass? And how's it related to chickens?
Oh man, this chapter was so wild to write. That's when you plan a book and what you get can be 2 different things, and you just have to lean into the adventure. What started this whole chapter was actually an article in the Christian Science Monitor like 15, 20 years ago, where 70% of the apple juice in America sold was coming from China, which blew my mind because like my grandpa had an orchard. I love apple trees. They're easy to grow. You can kind of grow them anywhere. So like, why would they be most of the apple juice being imported? And you realize it's a labor thing. So then I realized like there's all these trade agreements are really causing this race to the bottom in the offshoring of our produce system because of the labor stuff. And keep in mind, what that does is people doing it right here can't compete on price against these production models. So that's originally what I wanted to talk about with Driscoll's. So I started researching it, and then I realized I saw that they own the IP of the berry, but they contract out production.
Yeah.
It's honestly similar to sweatshops. It's the same thing Nike does, because that way you can shift responsibility. But then I realized, oh, this is chicken. Like I blamed someone. I joked to someone the other day, you can kind of blame chicken fingers for everything. Where a century ago, to make a long story short, when we wrote the regulations in response to Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, we didn't write chicken to the regulation because there weren't commercial chicken slaughterhouses. You literally just had a chicken in your backyard and you butchered it. So what happened down south is corporations exploited that loophole and applied that really exploited production model sharecropping to chicken. That where like now like 70% of chicken farmers in America to this day live in poverty. This model still exists. And what happened is USA could have stepped in and say no chicken, like you got to behave like the other meats. But instead, we've seen a race to the bottom. So they call it chickenization. It's a sociology term for it.
Yeah.
Pork got chickenized, and then what I realized is, oh, they're doing the chicken thing. So Driscoll's just chickenized, and I mean that's the thing I didn't expect writing this book is people have told me since reading this of like, oh, this industry is being chickenized, and it's this race to the bottom. And this is what happens when the USDA doesn't step in to, set standards.
What do you think's going to happen if Trump puts a tariff on, let's say, Mexico, where so much of our produce comes from?
It is so hard to fathom where we're going right now. That is even with the immigration stuff right now. I mean, so much dairy especially is so dependent on documented labor.
Yeah.
I don't know. And it's really scary and really dangerous. And it's hard to, because also what's going on too is these countries are so scared they're going to start shifting. They don't trust us as a buyer. And then I don't know. I can't. It's so volatile.
It definitely is. Well, let's talk about Walmart, because Walmart has had such a huge impact all across all of the economic sectors, but of course, food. Their market share is equivalent to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth largest grocery stores. That is a lot of market power. Can you talk about how Walmart drove consolidation in the entire industry and what it means for the price of food? And what
It's
is market power?
yeah. No, this is it's fun. I knew I wanted to write about grocery stores. I didn't plan to write about Walmart because I don't think of them as a grocery store. But once you read that stat, that's when I was like, they're everything. I mean, I love asking people what market share they think Aldi's has, and Aldi's has like a 1% market share. We've never had an entity this powerful in the food system. And honestly, in the history of mankind, which is like ridiculous to say, but keep in mind, Walmart is the richest family in the world. They employ the most people in America. I truly think the most powerful person in the American food system is a Walmart buyer, because you are buying for food for 1 in 3 Americans. And I had this phrase, grocery person told me, with Walmart, it's supply and command. You don't negotiate with them. So I've actually intellectually have thought of them as the closest thing we've ever had in America to a Soviet Union style Politburo. It's very top down. They're dictating the market because they have so much market power. Just one little stat that I think really shows you their power is Walmart has a rule for its suppliers that no more than 30% of your sales can come from Walmart, which I had to ask people in the grocery business why they would do that. And they're like, that's a supply chain risk management strategy. They know they're such a vulture that you basically sell to them at a loss or a cost, that if you go over that 30%, you put yourself at the risk of bankruptcy. So they want you on life support, but they don't want to kill you.
Yeah.
But keep in mind what this does is it's a waterbed effect. So basically it forces corporations, because you got to make some profit. So then it shifts it onto the local stores. That's why you'll see there was a great piece in Civil Eats last year, how like a grocery store in and then South Dakota Reservation, Native American Reserve, was paying more wholesale than what someone could buy at Walmart. And keep in mind, we used to have this whole regulatory framework that prevented a lot of this, called the Robinson-Patman Act, that Chairwoman Khan, is trying to bring back. And one of her last things she did was actually file a case against Pepsi for engaging in different price shenanigans with Walmart. That's how I kind of conceptualize Walmart. It's just, if I had my table and my barons, they're the head honcho.
Yeah. Well, can you talk a little bit about the impact on communities and the Walmart effect?
Yeah, I mean, if you can't tell, I love researching. There's a great old scholar from Iowa State, I believe, something Stone. What he did is he studied when Walmart came to Iowa. And what he did is he would count bankruptcies, like every clothing store, every blank that closed when Walmart came to town. And his conclusion was simple, is you don't buy more milk when Walmart comes to town, you shift your consumption. And so what Walmart does is it slowly, I kind of think, and this is kind of harsh language, its goal is to capture every dollar of America's underclass. So if you notice, I mean, this is a weird thing to say. Sam Walton, so much of what Walmart is what Sam Walton would just see someone else doing and just copy and doing it to a different degree. Like the notion of Walmart Supercenter is really a French idea. It comes from it's called Carrefour. It's known as the European hypermarket. He copied that idea. And actually, fun little tidbit, the original Walmart, it was called Hypermarket USA. There was only like 4 of them built. It was like 400,000 square feet. They had employees used to roller skate in them. They were so big. But he realized that was too much walking for Americans, and the parking lot was a disaster. So the Supercenter is actually a small town version of that concept. But he realized that's a sweet spot because it gets you in, because he doesn't even make money on grocery. He can sell it to you at cost, but he makes money with tennis balls, Christmas stuff, whatever. So that's what Walmart kept doing. It keeps adding on, pharmacy, tires. It's testing out vet clinics. It's testing out healthcare clinics. It basically has banks inside them. So what Walmart's doing is gobbling up all the money locally. So I think of it as first killing downtown, then it killed the mall. Now it's killing those big box stores. Because I kind of framed this whole chapter around, I kind of view as Walmart and Amazon have been an epic fight these last 5 years centered in grocery stores, kind of like Godzilla versus Mothra. And sure, it's fun to watch 2 titans fight, but they're going to destroy everything underneath.
Can you talk about the competition with Walmart and Amazon?
Yeah. My takeaway when I finished this chapter a year and a half ago was Walmart was beating Amazon. And I think here's the thing. How many stories have we seen about how awful Amazon is to your workers? On the flip side, the only stories I see on Walmart is look how much their store managers make. The Wall Street Journal keeps writing these stories of, their managers could make up 600,000. That's great for that one person. What about all those people that haven't had a wage increase, that are dependent on government assistance? It's on top of it, Northwest Arkansas it's booming because Walmart leveraged its grocery stores. To get in the weeds, is it basically built automated warehouses on the back of a lot of its supercenters. It's fulfilling orders from its things. It threw a ton of money on online ordering, where I would argue Walmart online is just almost as good as Amazon online. And Amazon tried to get into the grocery business for that last mile and it's kind of fumbled the ball. Yeah. Whole Foods is not what it used to be. And then they try to open these stores called Amazon Fresh. They're just not hitting. I joked to someone the other day, God, if I'd bought Walmart stock after this, I wrote that chapter, but I think people underappreciate how much Walmart's firing on all cylinders, because here's the thing, market power compounds itself. Once you have that advantage, you can dictate to your suppliers, and on top of it, I mentioned this in the chapter, the scary thing now is Walmart was so sick of being gouged by my other barons, it's making vertical plays into the food system. So it was sick of being gouged by the packing barons. So it's building its own beef supply chain. It's building 3 milk plants. And the question is that the system we want? Do we want one family doing this, or do we want independent family farms? And also, let me just never forget, this system makes bad tasting food.
Well, you took a trip to Bentonville.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. Can you describe some of the things you saw?
Yeah, I mean, that's my favorite part of this is I can read this stuff all day, but you just got to live in it. You just got to be in it. Mm-hmm. And one of my best buddies is from Arkansas, so I spent a lot of time down there. And it's like Main Street USA in Disney World, Disneyland. Bentonville's aesthetically beautiful, but it's eerie. And like the little detail I realize is even like the little Walmart tourist thing they have, like the original store. It's not the original store. The original store is nearby Rogers. It's a rundown antique mall. And then on top of it, the scary thing with Walmart Bentonville is it's what the current trajectory of America is, like the have-notness. It's one of the most unequal metropolitans in America. Sure, there's this great, if you're an elite white-collar worker doing tech at Walmart, you can be in that world, but there's a vast amount of child poverty in this area. I mean, there's more child poverty in that area than in the Arkansas Delta, which is historically what we know as the poor part of Arkansas. It's really scary. I mean, that Bentonville is, and the family, it's a weird company town where the 3rd generation, the grandkids like my age, are now taking over the empire, and they're bouchifying it, for lack of a better word. They're putting all these museums in. They own the hotels, restaurants. Walmart is it's just opening a massive new Silicon Valley style headquarters. But, the airport in town's named after them. It's one of this weird, I actually really encourage people to attend to visit it, just because, first of all, the Ozarks are really pretty, but you just got to see it. I mean, I think it says a lot about this moment of where we are, that the world's richest family is there. And I know I could talk about this all day.
So let's talk about the dairy barons chapter. I thought your story about Mike and Sue McCloskey was just fascinating, and their theme park industrial operation, Fair Oaks Farms. Can you talk a little bit about them and how they've affected the dairy industry?
Yeah, what's funny writing this book is first of all, I have a very Iowa-centric mind. And I quickly realized, first of all, every commodity is different. And also the different production regions in America, like California agriculture is so different than the Midwest. And dairy, I quickly realized, is because of the way that the federal milk order works, there's all these shenanigans going on in complexity. And the thing with Mike and Sue, you realize how much they were really shaped by what happened in Iowa. They saw the death of the hog family farm in Iowa in the 90s. And this is a weird thing to say, and I try to be respectful. This is going to sound weird to say. I try to be respectful to my barons. Like, there is a level of brilliance there. Sam Walton is kind of the American dream in some ways. I mean, this man started at JCPenney's in Des Moines, Iowa, and built this thing. But Sam Walton couldn't do what Sam Walton did because of Sam Walton. You know, I mean, he captured that regulatory system. Mike and Sue didn't come from farm families. Sue comes from the suburbs of New York, and he's a vet by training. They started in California in the dairy system, and they moved to New Mexico, and they saw the coming, not only what happened to the hog industry in Iowa, but also the coming water crisis in the West. So they saw the chance to buy 20,000 acres at once in the Midwest to move their dairy operation, which that's so hard to do. And the only reason why they could do it was that's supposed to be the third Chicago airport just south of Gary, Indiana. On top of it, Mike and Sue realized they needed a branded product or else they would go down. So Fairlife, their milk is like, I call it bougie milk. It's to quote one Coke executive, it's twice the price of normal milk for half the volume. And here's the thing, it's doing blockbuster numbers, especially with young men. You go to any Planet Fitness in America and young men love their Core Power drink. Here's the thing, it's been engineered. That thing was engineered for 10 years to get the formula just right. So I tell that story, and this is a chapter where, going back to kind of how I laid it out, I was so determined to talk about checkoffs. It's the nerdiest thing, but I think checkoffs control the conversation of the food system in America. Basically, farmers have to pay a tax into a program to advertise it, and now these programs work against them. And they're a slush fund. I think it pays for the revolving door USDA. Just look at Tom Vilsack, because between administrations, he was an industrial dairy lobbyist working for a checkoff. And it also, it finances all the junk science we're seeing at the land grants. Because what they realized is, you might have heard of checkoff just because of the Got Milk campaign. They realized that didn't stimulate demand. What they basically do is now they finance the junk science. And so Mike originally hated the checkoff because he's selling you a fancy milk. Why pay into a generic milk? So he alleged, I gotta be careful with my words here, alleged seemingly financed a lawsuit that went up to the Supreme Court to get out of it, lost, and then seemingly got into bed with it, where he took checkoff to help make his branded product Fairlife, to help make that Disney attraction, where a production model that's, advertising industrial dairy. So you took money from family dairy farmers going broke who didn't want to pay into this program to advertising a model of driving them into bankruptcy. And then he used it to finance a lot of the junk science. So long story short, when a cow defecates on land, she's fertilizing her feed. But when you put her in a metal shed, you need fossil fuels to grow her feed. But also when you pull her manure and it breaks down, it creates additional methane gas. So this production model is actually more detrimental to the climate. And Mike was all about getting ahead of the narrative. So they finance all these manure digesters to solve a problem of their own creation. And so this chapter is, and then Vilsack, Secretary Vilsack, thinks this is the future of dairy. This is his MO. This chapter, my goal with this one is, how do you take a really complex thing and just make it so cartoonish and so you understand it? Because they don't want you to understand. People profit off complexity and they want to wall you off. And so by showing you this I want you to see what's going on here.
Yeah, that was a pretty shocking story. Well, moving on to shocking stories, you can't talk about the corruption of our food system without talking about Cargill, the giant grain trader, the largest private corporation in America. Most of the foods that an American family eats at a meal is processed by Cargill. And it's likely also transported by their vast international transportation network. So can you give us a picture of how they got so big? And did they do it honestly?
Oh man. This is one of those, this was a weird chapter to write because it's such a powerful force that we don't know anything about. I mean, it shocks people when I tell them they're bigger than the Koch brothers. I mean, I originally framed this chapter as they're like Standard Oil. They're all about the movement of grain. They move 1 in 4, 1 in 3 grains globally. But then I actually conclude the chapter of thinking they're more, actually a better example is they're like the 19th century British Empire. The sun never sets on their grain. Like they're still in Russia because you don't know who they are. But they process everything from the salt used in roads to the, turkey you might have on your table. Yeah. The family story, I mean, they have an Iowa connection. They started up actually near literally 12 miles from my family when they came over from the Irish potato famines, settled in Iowa. And they were grain elevators, so they're regional. But I find so I use their story to actually tell the story of the Farm Bill, because the original Farm Bill is really, to me, rooted in Goldilocks. How do you produce enough but not too much? And you can only get so much. And then also on top of it, if you got some subsidy, you had to do conservation, take land out of production. And they hated it. They thought FDR was evil, Marxist, whatever. But turns out well-regulated, healthy markets are good for business. And it was really during the New Deals when their business empire exploded and they became a national thing. But here's the thing. They hated that Goldilocks framework because they want to move and process as much grain as possible. Mm-hmm. So I tell that corporate capture of the Farm Bill, where now the Farm Bill is designed to overproduce grains at the expense of everything else. So if you grow corn, you'll get a ton of subsidies, but if you grow carrots, you get nothing. And that is by design. So that's why you need money to be healthy in this country, because the Farm Bill it's not even for farmers anymore. It's for Pepsi. And that was that story, but it's such a weird, that's one of those things where here's the thing. I grew up around Cargill. It was next to my soccer field. They had a Cargill plant next to my church, next to my hospital I was born at, but I never really registered the company because of that, this like omniscient power that they have over the food system. And they intentionally don't want you to know. I mean, that's what makes them so powerful, is you don't know who they are.
And they are known for price fixing.
Rampantly. I mean, this is the funny undercurrent in my book. All my barons kind of known for price fixing. I mean, never forget the goal of any corporate executive is monopoly. That's where profits are. And that's why the first slide I show in any presentation is what Americans spend on food compared to other Western democracies. And we spend more than Germany, United Kingdom, Canada, and we're about dollar for Italy. And we shouldn't be shocked. Concentrated markets gouge. And I think the most concentrated space in is the American food industry. And so we're essentially paying more for junk. And this data, by the way, is before this whole inflation thing took hold, this greed inflation thing. So you can only imagine what it is now.
Well, speaking of manipulation, subsidies, and corruption, let's talk about the Batista brothers and JBS, another one of those companies that most people haven't heard of.
Wenonah, this chapter was wild in that I feel like I know the meat industry, and I didn't even know how insane this story was. Like, because here's the thing, the news was dropped right before the 2020 election. And just to let people know, these brothers pled guilty to bribing their way to monopoly level status. And I'm not talking campaign contributions. I'm talking they gave a politician a Manhattan apartment. Not only did we let them keep their monopoly status, Secretary Vilsack keeps giving them government contracts. On top of it, I think fixing the meat industry is one of the most bipartisan things down in America, because you see children being employed in these slaughterhouses, ranchers are screaming out because they're being underpaid, and you're being gouged at the store. And Vilsack didn't do, not only, so when I read this chapter, I actually kind of viewed the Batista brothers as almost a child that's never been disciplined. They just keep pushing the envelope. And to me, my anger is actually at Secretary Vilsack, because it's his failure to do here. And I really do think his failure to do something here partly contributed to the vice president's loss. Where the fact is they made an acquisition. All the meat companies got bigger these last 4 years.
Yeah.
JBS was allowed to acquire a company, and now they're trying to list on the public markets. And I know a lot of people are working to push back on that, but this company, I mean, it really threatens the rule of law if you can engage in that type of behavior. And this was a very delicate chapter to write, because what tends to happen is they get accused of something. Oh, they get accused of bribing bee inspectors, accused of engaging in deforestation, and they tend to settle.
Yeah. They're known for animal welfare issues too, right? Major animal cruelty.
Cruelty, and the thing scares me the most here is I don't want us to become numb to that, to the cruelty to the workers, to the animals. I mean, it is just, this is a hard job, and we don't need to make it harder.
Yeah. So one of the things that really stands out in your book is actually the system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Want to say a little bit more
Yes.
about that?
Yeah, because I want to make that point. These are choices we made. We made a decision after Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle to do something about the meat industry. We made that, those living wages. I mean, after that New Deal Goldilocks Farm Bill reform, we saw for every dollar you spent at the store, the farmer got the most ever recorded in American history. It was like over 50 cents a dollar. Now it's the lowest ever recorded, 13 cents. Imagine how different rural America would be if we had policies that got us up to 50%. We can choose a different system. I mean, that's actually part of my frustration when I read a lot of books is they just kind of complain. And so I actually want to spend a lot of time on the conclusion, because where do we go from here? And like everyone, if there's a silver lining of this moment, is everyone seeing the system not work. I mean, I've been on Glenn Beck's TV network talking about this. The American Conservative said every conservative should read this book. I've been on Bloomberg, which is a very pro-business podcast, talking about, because like yuppies go to Europe and they see a better food system. I'm a big believer that big things happen in America when weird coalitions come together. And I really do think doing something here is a moment to do it.
So I know you're updating Barron's. Can you give us a preview of what's going to be added?
Well, yes. Well, let me give a little shout out and a little laugh. Julie Dunn is on the call, I noticed, and I think she just commented, my book opens with Julie Dunn. And I didn't realize I did this, but it makes so much sense in retrospect. I opened with someone fighting back. And like I used to joke, we all should be Julie Dunn. By the way, one of my favorite book events I ever did is we did an event together in the hometown of my hog barons. And it was the one time I was scared and doing a book talk where I joked to my husband if I show up at a manure pit the next day. But I kid you not, I got 50 people in a small town. And you're lucky in New York City if you get 50 people at a book talk. And it was one of my best events where like half the people stayed behind afterwards just to tell me about what they saw. But I will say, speaking of updating the book, there is to my knowledge, one error in the book, and Julie is from Eldora, Iowa, and I actually identify her as El Dorado. But there is El Dorado, Iowa, just so people know. But on a more serious note, I'm probably going to be adding graphs to the book and also a new Baron. I'm working on Cisco as my Baron. I was telling people earlier, I really want to talk about the restaurant industry because I heard from several farmers I talked to that they're having hard market access. It's hard for them to sell to local restaurants because Cisco has such a dominant position, and they basically rolled up a lot of the broadliner industry. And I also want to talk about the homogenization of food, how like a lot of diners now taste like off-brand Denny's, serving the same potatoes just cooked differently. And so much of I kind of view regulation as guardrails, and so much of these guardrails are almost to protect companies from themselves and a race to the bottom. So I'm really excited for this chapter. I'm excited to show the world, but I just sent to the fact checker, and it has to work through that process, but keep an eye out for it.
Well, that sounds really exciting. Well, thank you so much. And I know that there are a lot of questions that the participants tonight want to ask you. So, Janine, do you want to take over?
I sure do. Thank you both so much. This has been so great to listen to. We have lots of questions, so let me dive right in. So the first question for you, Austin, is how likely do you feel it will be that anti-monopoly efforts will continue in the Trump administration?
I think they'll do something on big tech. I mean, right now a judge is deciding. The Biden administration got a victory as Google is a monopolist, so a judge is deciding now what to do there. I don't have much hope for meat. I have no hope given the USDA appointees. That said, you can do a lot at the state level. State AGs can bring a lot of cases, and the Colorado AG has done a lot in this. Minnesota's AG Keith Ellison has done a lot in this. Really encourage them, because work with them. I mean, encourage them to hire staff. So we'll see. I mean, this is to put on my political hat. I think this is such a good way to outflank Republicans, because they'll talk a lot about cattle ranchers, but what are you doing for them?
Let's see. I just have a comment that someone's asking if you could talk a little bit more slowly so they can follow.
Oh yeah, sorry. No, that's my. It's when I get excited, I talk fast.
That's exciting. I have another question here asking, what do you think the Trump administration will do regarding factory farming, if anything?
Assume they're just gonna. This is my personal view. They're gonna try to distract you over here, focus over here, and a lot of it will just be corporate deregulation, especially in the agricultural space, because they want you looking. He's gonna just put on a show, focus on that. Keep in mind, so you have to do two things at once. One, this is the most important moment to see something, say something. Let journalists know. Journalists are your best friends. My favorite example in Iowa is there's a movie, The Fargo. There's a mulch scene at the end. I don't want to get too graphic, but a confinement owner was doing something similar with his hogs, and you're not allowed to do that because about 10% of pigs die inside these facilities. And so a woman saw that, reported it to the DNR. They didn't do anything because Iowa is pretty useless and gutted at this point. So you know what she did? She emailed local news, and that story blew up. And now we know, and something was done because it shamed public officials to do something. That is the power you have. Never forget that.
Thanks for that reminder. I have a question here about the implications of this type of antitrust research. They're saying we've known about big meat companies since the 1980s. What difference do you feel it has made to know about these oligopolies and monopolies?
Let me just start with this premise. Personnel is policy. The appointment of Lena Khan is why you saw that game changer. First of all, every lawsuit wants to be here. Because I mean, she goes to any law school in America, she's a rock star. She did a fertilizer event in Iowa and you had 100 people show up. That's incredible. No bureaucrat in DC gets 100 people. What keeps me going is someone eventually will come along to do something here because the politics are just so good. At the same time, too, even like be so grim on the Trump administration right now, you have to be ready when the moment presents itself, because who knows? You know what I mean? I always compare Al Smith and FDR were the same person. They were Democrat governors of New York State who ran for president. Al Smith got killed in 1928. FDR killed his opponent in 1932 and ushered in a New Deal. And I make that example because so much can change in 4 years. But you got to start preparing now. What do you want to do, how should the meat system look? Because what I realized writing this is you also got to articulate a positive vision. You need to give people hope. Like, I love telling people Iowa should be the Tuscany of North America, because it's that hope that keeps me going. Because keep in mind too, I realized writing this book, most people are good people. They're trying to do the right thing. It's just a greedy few people holding us back. So focus on that. Because I think at some point, this darkness is just, people are going to want something different.
Yeah. What policy solutions can be enacted on the state and federal level to mitigate some of the harm? Again, this one is specifically asking in regards to meat production.
I think the second you regulate hog manure like human manure, confinements are no longer economically viable. Because no city, just for context, Iowa has 25 million hogs. They defecate 3 times more than us. That's the manure 75 million people. The environment cannot handle that much manure. My big silver lining here too is I think ethanol is going to die. I think actually I said this phrase at Iowa State this fall, and I wasn't chased off campus. I think anyone that thinks ethanol is good for the climate in 2024 thinks the world is flat. I was so scared to say that, but I love saying that. I think ethanol has actually been really detrimental to the family farmer. It pushed a lot of cattle off land because you can't compete on price. And ethanol is going to die. Cars are moving to hybrids and EVs. I mean, Norway, I believe Bloomberg just reported, had 100% of new cars being sold as EVs this past year. And most corn now is used for ethanol. So how do we shift? What do we do with? We got to start thinking of that shift. So how do we take that land out of corn production? Let's put it into vegetables. Let's put it into meat, pasture, meat, and dairy. Like my big thing personally is to, animals should be on the land. I want to return to that because I think a lot of grain will be robotics in the future, and that's not a bad thing. But there's only so many cows on pasture one person could look after.
We have a question here. How might you see the reversal of agriculture upzoning to residential, industrial, or mixed use in cities to increase nutrition security in urban and peri-urban settings?
Can you clarify that question for me? Are they talking about like growth boundaries?
I think talking about like if you're reversing the zoning, how could that help to increase nutrition security?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing. This is actually something if people could send me an email later, let me know good reading, I would appreciate that. I do know that Lexington, Kentucky, and Portland, Oregon have a version of growth boundaries. So I would like to know more, but I mean, that's something a lot of farmers face is the sprawl pressure, and like also the disconnect. The other thing to keep in mind with the food system is there's a disconnect between those who own it and farm it. It's like most farmland in Iowa is owned by non-Iowans. Grandma, grandpa died. They put it into a trust. The kids moved to Long Beach. And you just see the land's not cared for, but then it also, those people sell it into developers.
Yeah. There are a lot of questions here about what we as individuals and as consumers, what can we do locally? How can we be a part of making this change? I guess I'll just ask the question of what would you recommend people who are listening do?
So two little simple things, and one is so random and kind of funny. A lot of cities don't have this sounds weird, like sod requirements. And what I mean by that, and I noticed this just because I'm from Cedar Rapids. My parents, their home is built in a formal apple orchard, and when they built it, they took away all the topsoil, so it's just clay. And cities can have an ordinance where you have to at least have 5 inches or put some soil back. So my problem I had growing up was that you couldn't grow food in the backyard because it's clay. So you could push locally for an ordinance to have that, just to have soil. That way developers can't sell that away. And there's been efforts by different communities. And that's such a good example of little things like that really do matter because people just, who's paying attention to something like that? I only know that anecdotally because I like to garden when I was a kid. And I had to do a raised bed in Iowa where the soil's so good. And the second thing to do locally is I really do think focus on local procurement. As we phase out this old system, we got to help build up the new one because a lot of farmers will tell you personally, they don't like to do the farmer's market. They get rained out. It's not consistent. Schools buy carrots every week. It's good politics. It's good. So let's help drive that. It's also, all dairy served in Wisconsin should come from Wisconsin dairy farmers doing pasture. Let's focus on that because right now, I mean, the fact that they try to serve Lunchables to kids tells you how broken that is. And also focusing on the labor part where like Iowa actually has 2 really good culinary programs at the community colleges at DMAC and Kirkwood. Why not be able to go to local community college, make a made from scratch meal, make a decent living, working full time, working with local farmers? And by the way, a lot of people are doing that. Dolores Colin up in Storm Lake, Iowa has written a lot about that. A lot of the slaughterhouse workers also farm on the side, and they work with the school district to serve their food. And it's also a great way to teach kids about education. Because here's the thing, what I love about this, it's positive. I feel like people crave positive stories right now. And this is what you can do locally is find that farmer you like, help pair them up, help keep that money locally because they're doing a lot. They can't do everything. And when you add your voice to that, that really does matter for them. And on top of it, you're going to hit roadblocks, work with your state legislators. Hey, we're trying to buy local beef, but we're hitting X. Fix them. Because you got to have proof of concepts. I always joke DC is the last to know. So you got to have proof of concepts, brag about it. And this is something I learned from an old senator in Iowa, Tom Harkin. He was all about pilot programs. Because guess what? Politicians love showing up to them. They'll take photos. You know what I mean? Lean into it.
In your view, who are the most effective critics of the current American food industry?
Oh, man. It's hard. I mean, there's a lot of good let me think of names off the top of my head. I mean, sorry, there's a lot of books behind me I could probably point to. I think the thing right now, it's really hard to be critical of the system because the way the industry influences power. I framed a letter, actually, an email on my wall, because the head of the Iowa Pork Association emailed my dean at Yale a threatening thing based on a tweet I did. They're building a 4-story CAFO near Grinnell, Iowa, and I tweeted it out, and they sent an email to my dean. And the email was forwarded on to me, being like, don't worry about it. But I know if I was a certain land grant in Iowa, I would have been fired, and I would not know why. So that's why people like Julie Dunn actually are really, really important, is they're speaking truth to power. And there is a risk people like that take on. I mean, my dairy baron, so much of that chapter is rooted in a man named Pete Harding. He writes a dairy publication called Milkweed. He's been doing that. I mean, there's a lot of people speaking truth to power, and how do we elevate them? How do we get their stories told? And then get the journalistic care, because on top of it, a lot of local media is just hollowed out. And so getting the national papers to pay attention to these and not just copy and paste what the robber barons say. Like, anytime you see that story in the Wall Street Journal where a Walmart manager makes $600,000, you should email that journalist being like, what about the workers?
No. I think we have time for one more question. People are asking about any further reading suggestions, or beyond books, what resources do you recommend consumers to engage in order to learn more about food transparency and some of these issues?
Food transparency moves really fast. So I actually recommend subscribing like your guys' email list. The beauty of a book is it's like a crock pot. It takes a few years to put out. So sometimes things can get outdated. So if you want to stay up to the current on that, I really recommend that. But kind of a bigger thing, what I love doing is kind of reading old books, because a lot of that's that cliche quote, the past doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. It's like, Wenonah, your book inspired me a lot. I have Eric Schlosser's book, Fast Food Nation, behind me. I mean, that story holds true. I was rereading Stud Turkle's book on working from like 40 years ago. I'm also just like, you also got to read some happy books. Like, here's one little happy book I recommend to people. It's called 10 Restaurants That Changed America. This author profiles 10 different restaurants, but he's really telling you the history of different restaurants in America. So like, one is a steakhouse in Wall Street called Delmonico's, first steakhouse in America. And what he's doing is showing you how proteins in America have changed over time, how we used to eat turtle and now all that kind of stuff. And then he profiles, a soul food restaurant in Harlem to tell you about the history of soul food in America. I just thought that was really cool. And I think that actually, on a weird note, I think one of the most beautiful things about America is our food system. Like, I don't want to romanticize the past. And I think some people do that. In the day, our food system is rooted in slavery and genocide, but there's some good things we can learn from the past, but how do we move forward? And like, that's why I love going, like, I think Houston has an incredible dining scene, because you have all these different cultures coming together. I went to a place, there was like Cajun food mixed with Taiwanese food. And like, that's the beauty of America, is that kind of gumbo-ness. And so leaning into it, I can't say that enough, is focus on the positive, because that's what's going to inspire people at this moment. Whatever you think of your politics is everyone's just kind of dark right now. And, I'm happy to give people dark, book recommendations on that way. And there's a lot of good books out there, but also think about what things could be.
Well, thank you so much, Austin and Wenonah. Thank you, everyone, for asking such great questions. And please join me in thanking Wenonah Hauter and Austin Frerick for joining us this evening. Austin, we're so grateful for your time, and thank you for writing such an engaging and informative book on this issue that touches every one of us every day.
Oh, thank you so much. And by the way, Barron's makes a great Valentine's Day gift for people.
Yes.
I had to get that plug in.
Thanks for joining us, Austin.
My pleasure. Anyone, feel free to reach out. DM me in the social. My email is arfreerick@gmail.com. Love to hear any advice. As you read the book, let me know if there's good nuggets I missed. Those are my favorite emails to get. So yeah, just be in touch.
Thank you so much.